Hey everyone, so I know it's been a little while, but with 3.17.4, the Corsair is finally in the game, and with IAE coming up, there's a lot of exciting stuff, so I'm going to be making a few more videos about IAE, the new ships, and hopefully the new features of 3.18 whenever that comes out. But yeah, for now, I'm going to be taking a look at the new Corsair in this video. So I'm sure you already know the Corsair is Drake's version of an exploration ship. It's in that large size category, and its main competitor is stuff like the Constellation Aquila, and to an extent the 600i, although we'll see how that is after the rework. The main selling point of this ship, in addition to exploration though, is it's somewhat of a gunship with a ton of firepower available for the pilot, and it definitely has delivered on that. So as long as it delivers to an extent on some of the other promises and has some other capabilities, it's going to be a really solid ship. And I personally am a big fan of the design of this ship. I know it's been said before, but it's definitely one of the most Star Wars looking ships in this game. Those folding wings and just the overall material choices. And I've had a lot of fun flying it around already. It definitely still is a Drake ship, but it could be just as at home on somewhere like Tatooine as it is here on Microtech. So as per usual, I'm going to have stuff timestamped down below if you just want to hear about how it flies or how it does in combat. But let's get started with a tour of the layout of the ship. And the ship is just one floor, even though it's a large ship. So we'll just enter from the rear here, since I think that'll help give you a good picture of the layout. So the button for ramp access is over here. And I think the overall layout of this ship makes a lot of sense. It shows that they've been learning over at CIG how to make a more functional layout and one that effectively uses the space in a ship. So you've got this rear ramp, which is pretty standard. It's wide enough really for anything that you'd want to be doing with it, and it's got no issues reaching the ground, unlike some other ramps. Although one thing to note is that for an explorer, where you might be landing on pretty uneven terrain, the landing gear doesn't have the greatest clearance on this ship. So while it works fine on this landing pad, if you've got any sort of rocks beneath you, you're probably going to impact those. But again, this is only sort of an explorer. It's just as much of a gunship as it is an explorer, and a lot of the exploration that you'd be expected to engage in with this ship is piracy, but Drake is known for not directly saying those things. Alright, so let's get this ramp closed. And since this is the newest Drake ship, we've got their implementation of the more detailed controls for doors. So you've got like the functional room light button, or sometimes functional, so you can turn off the lights. I believe these panels were first introduced on the Mercury Star Runner, but now we've got Drake's version of them on this ship. And yeah, as you can see, this cargo bay fits either 72 SCU or an Ursa-sized rover, and this Ursa rover even fits with the turret and its extended position. So as you can see, there's a pretty good amount of height clearance, and hopefully you'd be able to fit things like the Origin G12 rover or whatever you need to in here. So 72 SCU, that's pretty good. It's not quite as much as the main competition of this ship, the Constellation Aquila, but this ship also beats it in some of the other categories. And then as you can see here, we've got some of the components in this cargo bay, and that's about it for this room. So moving on to the rest of the ship, it's nice to see that we've got stairs here instead of a ladder or some sort of lift. Just makes it that much easier to get around the ship. And then directly off of the cargo bay, we have this component room, which is mostly just housing for all of these components. There's some more decorative components over here, like the heater, and then stuff that you'll eventually hopefully have to be servicing, like the quantum drive here. And then off to the right of this component room, you have a room which lets you carry out the main role of this ship, which is exploration, but in quotes. And the real purpose of this room is basically going to be for gearing up before you board other ships and explore the contents of their cargo hold. And there's enough suit lockers and weapons racks in here for everyone in the crew to be able to take part in those boardings, which I guess is kind of important, because with a crew of only 4 people, you're going to want everyone on hand for that, especially if you're going to be boarding larger ships. Now I did say most everything on this ship makes sense, but it wouldn't be a Star Citizen ship if there weren't a few emissions. So if you open this door here, you can see there's not really any good way to close it. So yeah, you can hit this button, which you think might close that door, but it actually closes the airlock behind you. And if you hit this close button, it also just closes that door. You can see if I go ahead and open that, this stays open. So the only way to close this at the moment is by reaching over there. Not a major concern, but it's just kind of funny to see things like that. So yeah, this room is set up pretty well for this purpose of boarding other people's ships and gearing up before you do so, but unfortunately it's going to be a little while till you actually get to use it for that, since that kind of relies on being able to dock with another ship, and we don't have ship-to-ship docking yet. But for now it'll be useful for the weapons rack, just to have a place to put your weapons, especially as we get more and more physicalized inventory. And I could also see it being useful in EVA, because that's one thing I feel like this ship is lacking a bit, is EVA access, which is a little bit strange, because a lot of piracy that you're doing I assume would take place in zero gravity, and you see that in the other Drake designs. So stuff like your Caterpillar and Cutlass all have side access doors to their cargo bays, which makes loading and unloading cargo even in 0G very easy. But with the Corsair here, the only direct access to the cargo bay is through that ramp at the back, and if you've ever tried to use a ramp in 0G in Star Citizen, it's a bit of a pain. So that's one other kind of major oversight of this ship, but that could also potentially be remedied by either traveling with a fleet and using a Caterpillar to load up any cargo that you pirate, or by using this airlock here, or just by dealing with the ramp physics in 0G. They have been getting better, and you usually don't die. Okay, so moving forward in the ship, this is the main crew area. Off to the right you have the dining area, and then to the left you have the crew rooms. And that's one nice thing about this ship, is compared to other Drake ships, the living accommodations are much nicer. And that's because as an exploration ship, they're expecting the crew to stay on the ship for longer periods of time, so the included accommodations are slightly nicer than what you'd usually expect. But yeah, each one of these rooms is pretty simple. You just have your bed and a storage locker. Still a lot better than bunks though, and even better than the crew area on the 600i at the moment. So it'll be nice to see the rework of that to bring it up to par with a Drake ship at least. This dining area here is kind of similar to what you'd see on the Caterpillar. You have a small galley, and then off here is the one shared bathroom, which isn't always a standard feature on Drake ships. Off to the right here is the elevator, which I'll get back to in a second. And then moving forwards towards the bridge, you have the access to the two side turrets, which are one of the unique features of this ship, having turrets that are 90 degrees to the front of the ship. And then again, moving forwards towards the bridge, you've got the two seats there, and here you have the captain's quarters. It's pretty much the same as the crew quarters, it's just in a separate area, closer to the bridge. And so yeah, here's the cockpit. It's very similar to other Drake cockpits, although one little nice touch I like is there's kind of a theme of using little levers for a bunch of the functions all over the ship, and a decent number of the controls on this dashboard use similar levers, so it's kind of thematic and makes this ship a little bit unique from the other Drake ships. There's also this little fan thing here, which is kind of cool. Alright, let's head back to that elevator because there are a few features on this that are a little bit unique, and the first thing I want to comment on is how you actually control it, because I think this is one of the best implementations of the personal inner thought system that they've had so far. So instead of having to point at it and then guess where the invisible buttons are, like you would on something like a 600i, you actually have three physical levers that you can clearly see do different things, and they're even color-coded. So this red one here will just take you down to the ground. So yeah, if you need to get out of your ship in a hurry, you can just come over here, look at the levers, and immediately pull the right one. So I really like this. Although it couldn't all be wins, because you have this button here to call the elevator to you if it's not already down, but you're also going to want to send it back up so that people can't just hijack your ship, and unfortunately it doesn't do that at the moment. So I hope they add in that functionality, because at the moment you have to kind of awkwardly pull this lever and then hop off quickly before the elevator goes back up. And then you probably notice that there's a third lever on here, even though the ship only has the one main level, and that's because you actually have roof access on this ship, which I think is a really cool feature. Now there's not a whole ton of obvious uses for this, but one I could possibly think of is maybe using this as a vantage point. So say you land somewhere and you want to do some scouting from a slightly elevated position, or you could potentially even use it as a vantage point for taking shots at targets in the distance. Either way, it's nice to have the access onto the exterior of the ship like this, and it doesn't seem to hurt anything by doing so. So it's a nice feature to just have. Alright, so that's it for the layout of the ship. Again, I think it really makes sense. They've made good use of the space, and the pathing between the areas also is very convenient. You've got the ramp to access your cargo, but you also have an elevator to get right to the bridge if you need to. And rooms are where they need to be in relation to the function that they're doing, like having the armory right next to the docking port. And this isn't always the case on other ships, especially the older ones. It's not a completely perfect design. I think my main gripe is just the lack of EVA access to the cargo bay, but other than that, there's not really much that's offending in the layout. I guess the amount of doors between the rear and the front of the ship can get kind of annoying if they're taking a little while to open, but again, that's kind of a security feature on a ship like this. It creates some choke points, especially if you're being boarded, which you might be since you're going to be conducting pirate-like activities. And then maybe one other small thing is there is a bit of dead space in the front, especially near the entrances to those side turrets, so maybe it would have been nice to have a dedicated sort of exploration or scanning thing there. Alright, so now that I've gotten through all of that, let's get to the general flight performance of this thing. It flies about how you'd expect based on how it looks. So its turning performance is definitely not great. It's even worse than something like a Constellation. So yeah, even though this thing has large wings, don't expect to be zipping around in it like it's a Star Runner. But just like a lot of the other Drake ships, it does have very large main thrusters, which means it goes faster in a straight line than you might expect, especially when you're using boost. So I think the flight performance is in line with where it should be. It's not too annoying to where you're not going to want to use this ship, but it's also enough of a hindrance that getting those main guns on target is going to be a bit of a hassle. And I think that makes sense just because those main guns are so massive and it would be difficult to deal with this ship otherwise. And then one unique thing about this ship is it does have a few flight modes. So it has your typical VTOL toggle, and you can see that not all of the thrusters, but a few of the main thrusters sort of pivot to give you more vertical thrust. Although even in this VTOL mode, you really don't have much side-to-side thrust at all. You can see when I'm pulling this ship out of the hangar here, it's getting blown in the wind very easily. So yeah, that gives you an idea of how weak those lateral thrusters are and how much of a fight it is to get this ship to go any direction but forwards. And then the wings on this ship are also kind of unique too, in that the ship functions completely normally with them in their fully folded state. I believe I recall hearing about that being a limitation in the past, where having different states for the ship outside of landing gear deployed and not deployed wasn't something they could do. So for something like the Arrow, that was always a pain because if you wanted to have the landing gear deployed, you'd have to also have the wings folded up, which you wouldn't want in certain cases. Like, if you were trying to land it inside of the Carrack, it would actually fit if you were able to land it with the landing gear down and the wings deployed. But since those two were tied together, you aren't actually able to fit it in that small landing bay. But with this ship, the wings are on a completely separate toggle, so hopefully that means that they figured out how to do that. But yeah, as you can see, deploying the wings is done with this button here in the cockpit. And I don't think by default it's bound to anything, because I tried your typical VTOL toggles and even toggling the weapon systems. Couldn't get them to deploy. So yeah, you can fly completely normally, even go into quantum travel with the wings up like this, but as soon as you pull out the landing gear, they fold back up, which is completely fine because that left small wing is extending so far down that you're definitely not going to be able to land with that fully out, so it's better to just not have that be an option to forget. Alright, so the last thing I want to cover in this video is the combat performance of the ship, and you could probably see just while walking around that it's completely covered in weapons. So the pilot has access to 4 size 5 mounts and 2 size 4 mounts, which, to give you context, the Constellation is known for having a large amount of weaponry for a ship of its size, and it only has 4 size 5 mounts, which are basically mandated to be gimbaled size 4s due to the restriction of the landing gear not giving you enough height to equip size 5s on those bottom mounts. But as far as I can tell, with this ship you could actually equip size 5s on all of those mounts and size 4s on 2 of those mounts. So yeah, it has what the Constellation has, plus 2 additional size 4 mounts, all under control of the pilot. And that's why I was talking about earlier, it makes sense for this ship to be kind of sluggish, because if it weren't, it would be crazy to have that much firepower in a ship of this size. And you can see those weapons in action here. This is just a claim jumper mission, so you wouldn't expect there to be much resistance, but usually these remote sentries take a little while to pop, but with this thing they just get melted. So by default, you can see here it's running gimbals for all of the pilot weapons, and I think that makes sense if you're going to be even considering taking on smaller targets, and especially if you're going to be running this thing solo, because trying to point this thing at a target with fixed weapons would be very difficult. But having those fixed mounts does give you the flexibility to run this thing with larger sized weapons, and you actually might want to do that because you have turrets that could give you some cover against smaller ships if you plan on bringing along crew to man those turrets, and then you could use the even greater firepower of filling those mounts out with fixed weaponry to take on big ships. So if you're going to be engaging in piracy against larger targets that have bigger shields that you need to melt through, then that might be something that you want to do. So let's talk about those turrets real quickly. The one on the top I think is going to be the most useful to have manned, and that's going to be controlled by your co-pilot seat. And this co-pilot seat is actually pretty cool. It brings you down into a vertically stacked position with the pilot, and you're in a kind of completely separate area, but still at the front of the ship. I hope that once we get the scanning and exploration features in for this thing, you're able to operate them from here because you've got a nice viewpoint where the ship's headed still, if those features do end up being something that's not pilot controlled. But anyway, so this remote turret is at the top rear of the ship, and it's going to be useful in keeping fighters and other stuff off of your tail, since with this thing not being maneuverable, you're not going to want to have to rotate the whole thing around to deal with someone in your blind spot, and it's likely that that wouldn't even be possible in most situations. Unlike the main weapons on the ship, the turrets do have pretty small weapons. It's only twin size 2s on all of them, but I guess you couldn't have these be too large, or else it would be a little bit ridiculous if you manned all of them and pointed them all at one target. With the firing arc of this turret here, it's pretty decent, and you could point it at a target that the main guns are already firing at. So yeah, I think if you're gonna have one turret manned, this is the one that you're gonna want to have manned, and this one is pretty useful. Now, as for the side turrets, I think these are a little bit less useful, although with the way that they've implemented them here, they're better than they could be. So you can see that once you get into them, they stick out quite a bit from the ship, so it's kind of like the hammerhead turrets, but in a miniature fashion, and you can't quite bring them, I think, to straight on, or this might be exactly straight on, but you can't point them any farther than that. So if you're looking at a really large target that's in front of you, you might be able to hit it with these side turrets as well as the main guns, but it's going to be a bit of a struggle. The main point of these, again, is going to be defending you from smaller and more maneuverable ships, but I personally wouldn't really enjoy manning these turrets because most of the time you're not going to have much in your firing arcs. I don't hate them being here because you already have enough firepower with those main weapons to disincentivize people from staying in your blind spot, and they're a unique quirk of this ship. They're just not the most useful thing. So ship combat is still evolving, so who knows what it'll be like in whatever final state things end up in, but they've definitely positioned it where they advertised it to be, which is the ship with the most guns in its class, and most of those being available to the pilot, and for now it's a whole lot of fun to fly, and especially against NPC targets that are relatively easy to hit, you'll have a lot of firepower available to you flying this thing. So if that's what you're looking for, this is a great ship to do it. So yeah, overall, I really like this ship. Again, this is one of my favorite size categories for ship because you're able to still run it solo, and at this size it gives you the ability to do a whole lot of things. You got that cargo hauling to some extent, you can carry a vehicle around, you definitely can do combat, and eventually you'll be able to do exploration. And with the size of this thing, you can add in crewmates, which will expand your capabilities. At some point, you'll be able to board other people using this ship. And yeah, it's nice to finally have some options in the size category that truly compete with the Constellation in combat, and it even looks good while doing it. I want to hear you guys' thoughts on this ship though. Was it worth the wait to you? Or is there something that it's missing that was originally promised, or just anything that's kind of disappointing to you? Alright, so that's going to be it for the Corsair. Now I just want to talk a little bit about my plans. So I'm hopefully going to be making some more videos covering stuff at the IAE, like I said, and also covering stuff in 3.18 whenever that comes out. I'm looking forward to the Galaxy, which I guess this is a spoiler if you haven't looked at the leaks, but RSI is coming out with a new ship that's going to be in the size class of something like a Carrack, and this is going to be kind of a Carrack competitor, but it's more of a multi-purpose ship, and it looks to be modular in some capacity, so that's kind of exciting. And then Drake is also going to be announcing another new ship, the Cutter, I believe, and that one's a single person kind of nomad competitor, I think. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those two are, and also seeing if there's just any other surprises with IAE. And if you're wondering where I've been, there's really no special reason. I just haven't been playing the game that much. Just the combination of the updates not being too groundbreaking, plus the added frustration of losing your items every time you die, and still the same old stability concerns. It's been a somewhat frustrating experience, so I don't want to I didn't want to feel like I was forcing myself to make a video, because then it wouldn't turn out that well, or it would turn out overly negative. So I appreciate you guys coming back, those of you who do, and I'm excited to play the game again. So like I said, I plan on making at least a few more videos about IAE, and we'll see how it goes from there. Alright, so if you've stuck around this long, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys, and I'm looking forward to what you guys have to say in the comments about the Corsair, IAE, and just anything in general, and thank you all for watching.